Welcome to our broadcast. I'm Sara Vaezy, Chief Digital Officer at Providence. As a reminder, the information provided during this event is for information purposes only. For any medical questions, please reach out to your primary care or healthcare professional. Thank you all for joining. Joining me today during this live event is Andy Chu, SVP of Product and Technology at Providence, leading our product development efforts within the Digital Innovation Group. Andy, thanks for joining today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, this is a topic that is near and dear to both of our hearts. Andy, we're going to be talking about consumer identity and engagement today. And, I'll just kind of preface this by saying we, of course, all live in a consumer-centric world. We all have digital experiences that drive our day-to-day interactions with how we do basically everything. And from a business perspective, those digital consumer experiences can drive acquisition, retention, and long-term value for all sorts of kind of businesses, industries. And it's no different really in healthcare, but, sort of from the macro lens. But there are some unique characteristics in healthcare. And in particular, let's talk a little bit, can you walk us through what some of the health system challenges are? And in particular, get into this notion of like, the EMR, what's the role of the EMR as it relates to engagement and those experiences? Let's just start there. And for folks watching, the EMR is the electronic medical record. So Andy, over to you.
All right, that's a great question. I mean, if you look at the evolution of the EMR, it started, 20, 30 years ago, and really focusing on the back office operation, the clinical workflow. And that's how it started. And it really accelerated the movement after the ACA, and as a result, it was almost like a natural evolution, right? So a lot of the clinical workflow, a lot of that information now needs to be presented to consumer, so to drive more self-service. And however, the entire infrastructure and platform was not really built coming from a consumer-centric angle. So if you compare that with a lot of startups, what they're doing, focusing on the healthcare technology or healthcare services, they're really starting from the consumer mind. So if you look at just kind of doing a difference in terms of experience, there's a gap, right? So, and then I think that's one piece. And then the second piece is EMR is the core of operations for pretty much all health systems or clinics and medical groups. So, and there are a lot of workflows that's actually built in, right? And there are literally thousands or tens of thousands of people are working through it. So trying to build and new things on top of all these application and workflow is a very complicated and complex environment. So as a result, oftentimes you're seeing, that's why healthcare systems tend to move a little slower as a result, in addition to all the regulatory, legal requirements, what we have to do with HIPAA and everything else. So I think that's one of the biggest challenge, right? So, and now also most health systems also going through financial pressures, and how do we continue to focus on the bottom line? So there's so many pieces are in play. However, if you think about that, coming from all the startup again, looking at all the consumer services, and of course today's big topic was Amazon buying One Medical. They really started out from the consumer mindset, right? From the digital experience, their physical presence, how they are interacting with consumer. So the way how we're thinking about it is, we have to figure it out. How do we actually getting the identity of the consumer sort of out of the EMR, if you will, and to enabling the health system, essentially creating a platform in conjunction to the EMR system, so that the health system can actually be a bit more nimble and also allow different health system to work with other applications and services in this space. Because in this space alone, there are billions of dollars have been invested in health tech and health tech services. The question is, health systems are not going to be able to invent everything themselves. Then the question is, how do you actually, work from an ecosystem perspective? And you sort of have to think about a new platform or a platform that work in conjunction with your existing infrastructure.
Awesome. So if I had to kind of summarize, equating the digital consumer experience with your EMR is problematic because it's too complex. It's not really consumer centric. It maybe have an incomplete view of the user, and it isn't necessarily differentiated either, right? Your patient portal really is your clinical patient portal, and from one system to another, they all more or less look the same, and it opens up room for disruption. So it's really important that we kind of abstract out of that and build on top from an identity, from an ecosystem perspective, so that we can drive meaningful, scalable, connected digital experiences with our consumers.
Absolutely.
Can you, some of this, what's the role of a health system in doing this? There is some sort of natural advantages that health systems have as it relates to doing this, despite the fact that we are complex in nature and operate within a heavily regulated environment. But we're going through a lot with the last 2.5 years of COVID and financial pressures that come with that. But there definitely are some advantages as it relates to kind of trust, how well we know our patients and consumers. Can you tell us a little bit about those and how we're building on top of that? You mentioned identity. How do you bring those things together?
Yeah, I think I'll look at it from two different perspectives. One perspective is let's start with the consumer and start with the patient. I think from that perspective, and there are new surveys have come out, pre-COVID, after COVID. I think the high degree of trust that consumer and patient have related to health system and the providers has been really high, and over the last couple of years, actually even been higher if you look at some of the same surveys that have come out. So I think that's one huge advantage, right? So because you look at from the type of misinformation out on the web, all the way to where they can receive care. And the other aspect of it is that the health system has a breadth of services that they can actually offer to consumer and patients. And oftentimes these patients are not even aware what are the full suite of offerings do some of the health system actually have to be able to offer, because they can't actually present it in a more holistic way. And then I think the third pieces of it is that sort of between health system and payers and employer, how do we as a system or health systems can present the right information to consumer from billing and to be more price transparent. Now that's in itself is a very complicated process, but it is it's up to the industries, as all the players involved to be able to be more effective in presenting some of that information for the sake of the patients. And then that's from a consumer lens. I think even looking at the health system perspective, again, it's come back to the breadth of services and offerings, from not just focusing on the primary care, but just making a seamless process for a patient to navigate through the entire end-to-end journey from booking an appointment, getting into the right care. In between the episodes of care, how do we actually provide information in a more holistic way, all the way to dealing with billing and payments related type issues. So if you look at all that experience, identity is really a core part, right? Because you're tying in not only the clinical data, but the billing, the digital touch points, the psychographic information of the patient or population health data, and so that you can do a better job as a system to actually serve our community. I think that's a really different way of how health systems should be thinking about dealing with consumer and consumer engagement, right? So rather than being extremely reactive when someone is sick, they come to you, but actually how do you stay top of mind, actually knowing these patients as person, right? And actually actively engaging with patient. And a lot of that can be automated, right? And current environment, we have a lot of provider burnout. Also, there are not enough efficient staff, right, to cover all these things. So in a way, we're asking people, the health system, to do more, but we believe there are ways we can do that in a more programmatic fashion that can actually have these dialogues with consumer in between episodes of care and everything that I just talked about.
Yep. So, we've got everything that you've just talked about kind of can be manifested in the form of a platform that enables a 360 consumer view, a much broader experience that is extended beyond just an episode of care, but it can also be between episodes of care. It can be non-clinical in nature. It's ecosystem friendly. So it really takes in, we've had conversations with other folks who are like, it's about engagement, not entrapment. So it's not just with our myopic lens, even though we do have a broad range of services, it really is with a market and consumer facing kind of lens. And then that can behave as a kind of scalable growth driver for the system as well, in terms of enabling new lines of business, new business models, and things like that. So that we have this, kind of this notion that platforms can do that for us. Can you walk the group through the 4 components of our vision for the CIEP and what your team is actually building to achieve these?
Yeah, so what Sara talking about, the CIEP, so for those of you that are familiar with our internal acronym, is our Consumer Identity and Engagement Platform. So this is something that we're actively working on in addressing some of the things that I just described. So in terms of the component, one is the identity, because ultimately, as what we described, we have to really start thinking about from a patient identity standpoint, from patient identity verification to authentication to profile management, and bring in a lot of the data from the different parts of the health system, not only from the marketing, but the clinical and everything else in between. And really not just taking it purely from an analytics perspective, but actually bring all these different data into place so you can start segmenting different consumer segment and population group. And then with that in mind, then now we have more or less the 360-degree view of the patient. Then you can actually power a set of experiences that you can provide as a health system to consumer, be it your mobile app or web experience to your websites, and any other potential third-party applications that you may want to have, or also allows you to have the flexibility to do any type of business development deal with potential any other third parties. And then with the experience sitting on top of it, would kind of ties back to the working with the third party, would be sort of a new ecosystem that you need to work with. Like I mentioned earlier, there are a number of health tech startups, be it on the services side or technology side, wanting to work with health systems. But if you look at the trend over the last couple of years, they're going directly to payer, they're going directly to employer, or oftentimes also going directly to consumer as well. So essentially, you're creating this data siloed, what's going to happen over the next few years. Then the question is, how do you actually bring some of those players into the fold? How do you actually work with this broader ecosystem that's accelerating at a very fast clip than more traditional players in this space? And then the fourth element would be the analytics, right? So ultimately, you need to figure it out, the return on ad spend, or not just the advertising spend, but the return on development spend as well. And also really tracking the overall journey of the patient. So you need to have a new analytics capability to actually track through everything. So those will be the four components that we're actively working on.
Awesome. And so this is, potentially really transformational. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're thinking about value? And you mentioned insights. Insights kind of fundamentally come to value generation. It's not just enough to know something; you want to do something with it. So, can you tell us a little bit about how you think about value with this platform that you're building?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, any technology investment at the end of the day is coming back to the value that you're delivering, be it helping to reducing operational cost or enabling to generate additional revenue. There's a recent report looking at the overall spend of the healthcare services in the U.S. Trillions of dollars. About 8% of that is all related to operational running the business, so to speak, and that's a lot of cost, right? So there's a lot of efficiency what we can continue to drive. So if you look at that again, ranging from how efficient we can actually maximizing utilization of appointments, all the way to how patients are dealing with health system in terms of dealing with their payment and financial issues. For certain patient population, when they're super sick, there a lot of back and forth with the health system, multiple different care teams, and all the paperwork has to get involved. A lot of that can be automated. A lot of it can be streamlined. So all those are essentially taking out a lot of the cost element and really help not only on the financial side, help the health system, but ultimately it would benefit the patient as well, because you take out the frustration. We're all consumers, we're all patients, right? We're all at times also frustrated going through the whole process. So I think those are all the things that we're looking at is how we can, from a measurement standpoint, we're looking at the cost efficiencies as well as the contribution margin that we can provide above and beyond what some of the existing infrastructures are in place.
Got it. So, I think the way you're describing it is fundamentally there's value in self-service because it can reduce some of the kind of friction and burden of having this stuff done by someone on your behalf. There's also a huge value proposition as it relates to growth, as you articulated with respect to contribution margin and enabling new forms of revenue, new forms of new business models. So it sounds like you're really hitting on a lot of the important drivers of value with this platform. So that's really interesting. Andy, we're almost out of time. What else would you like to add about this? Do you want to tell folks maybe a little bit about what's the path forward here? Are you going to kind of keep building this for the next 5 years, or do you have a different plan? I know we have a commercial strategy. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think we have come to the stage now. We have adoption internally within Providence. We are now actually looking at commercialization opportunity for the platform. So we're sort of open for business, so to speak. And that's the stage that we're currently at. There are a lot more on our product roadmap what we can do. Every day we're identifying new opportunities. From a driving efficiencies standpoint, obviously we're working very closely with the different teams here at Providence, but we're also actively talking to a number of other health systems. I think the message has been resonating very well, and I think all of us are facing, from a system perspective, are facing similar pressure. So we are seeing there are a lot of common areas where we can actually help in a dramatic way from what we're building. So that's sort of the immediate next step.
Great. Any final thoughts you'd like to add before we wrap up for the day?
No, I think this is all the health system are having definitely difficulties right now from a financial standpoint after 2.5 years of COVID. But I do see that as health system, we need to be there to continue to support our community, support our patients, and I think it's our job that in this space to help make the infrastructure and the system to be more efficient to help our patients. So, and that's why a lot of us are coming to work every day and continue to move forward. So that will be my sort of departing thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think especially for those of us at Providence, we are so mission driven. Our organization is mission driven, and we're really here to serve our communities. And through the work that we do within digital innovation, get as close to our customers as possible through the tech enablement of our system and our services. So that definitely keeps me going. And really appreciate you sharing with everybody today, Andy, about what we're doing in identity-driven engagement. And thank you to everyone who joined and listened. To learn more about our initiatives, programs, services, ways to give, or if you're looking for medical care, please visit providence.org and make sure to follow us on social media at Providence System for LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, and under Providence on Twitter. Thank you, everyone.